Chapter 905. Bearer of bad news. The shadow hid on the slope of a tall cliff, observing the wide highway that stretched north between the mountains and the ocean. The world was obscured by a white wall of snow, but it could feel slight tremors running through the ground. Something was approaching. A few moments later, two bright dots appeared inside the blizzard, slowly growing larger as their source drew closer. Then, powerful beams of light cut through the snowstorm, making the shadow shift its position. Several kilometers away, Sunny frowned with a troubled expression. People! What approached from the north was not a swarm of nightmare creatures or a lumbering monstrosity, but a small procession of civilian transports, accompanied by a handful of military vehicles. They cut through the blizzard, rolling down the highway at a slow speed. Several of them appeared battered and barely functioning. Soldiers could be seen manning the turrets, shivering in the vicious cold. His scowl deepened. What are they doing here? Luster, bring the rhino to the edge of the coastal highway. Leaving the carcass of the dead demon behind, Sunny walked forward. A few minutes later, he was standing on the snow-covered surface of the highway, with the rhino positioned behind him. His silhouette was drawn against the backdrop of the blizzard by the beams of two powerful spotlights. The convoy was already close, but they did not notice him yet. Striking the butt of the cruel sight into the ground, Sunny hesitated for a moment, and then activated the Light Eater enchantment. Immediately, the silver blade of the spear shone with brilliant light. It was as though a small sun bloomed in his hand. Somewhere behind, Bell and Dorn emerged from the APC, carrying their weapons with guarded expressions. Samara had climbed to the roof of the vehicle and was now laying on it, resting her chin on the stock of her rifle. The other three irregulars remained inside, protecting Professor Obel and Bate. The radiance of the cruel sight was too intense to not be noticed. Finally, the soldiers protecting the small convoy reacted, turning the turrets in the direction of the unknown threat. Their faces were tense and frightened. The lead vehicle slowed down. I hope those fools don't start shooting blindly. Using the extraordinary rock and its sonorous enchantment, Sunny augmented the volume of his voice. Calm and oppressive, it rolled across the highway, easily breaching through the howling of the wind. This is Captain Sunless of the 1st Irregular Company. Think twice before you shoot. Luckily, the soldiers seemed to have preserved at least some of their composure. No bullet flew in his direction. Not that a mundane bullet would be able to do him serious harm, let alone scratch the surface of the undying chain. A few minutes later, the lead vehicle of the strange convoy came to a screeching halt not too far away from the rhino, forcing the transports to follow suit. A figure in a military uniform emerged from it, hesitated for a bit, and then headed towards Sunny. Judging by the lack of an armor-type memory, and the way the man was holding to the collar of his coat, shivering in the cold, he was a mundane human. While the soldier walked, Sunny's shadows got closer to the convoy and studied it. The transports were full of frightened civilians, and their military chaperones were few and far between. Everyone seemed to be in a rough shape, tired and numb. There were women, children, and elderly among the refugees, all scared and exhausted, but not a lot of men. And there was not a single awakened among them. Sunny's mood turned darker and darker. Finally, the soldier walked close enough to see him. Raising a hand to shield his eyes from the rhino's lights, he mumbled in a startled voice. "It really is the devil." Sunny looked at him with a frown. "I can hear you, you know." The soldier flinched, and then lowered his hand, trying to stand at attention. "Oh, sir, sorry, sir." His voice, despite the effort to sound professional, seemed haunted. Sunny sighed and shook his head. At ease. Then he looked past the man's shoulder at the battered convoy, wondering what it was doing here. "Please explain who you are and why you are in this area. I thought that the First Army abandoned the southern reach of the Antarctic center. The soldier remained silent for a while. Eventually he said, "Sir, you must know that our division suffered heavy losses when the siege capital we were building was destroyed. A sufficient number of us had time to evacuate, taking the civilians with us. However, the aftermath was chaotic. Sonny did not know the details of how the city had been obliterated, except for that it had been done by a Titan. Nevertheless, he could imagine the panic and mayhem that had ensued in the aftermath." He nodded. The man let out a heavy sigh. Most of those who escaped retreated north, but for many of us, that direction was cut off. We gathered as many people as we could and eventually headed south. Something about that story did not sit right with Sonny. He interrupted the tired soldier. "You made it all the way here driving on the highway." Staying so close to the ocean was too dangerous. Even Sonny did not dare choose that convenient but dire path. How did a bunch of mundane soldiers survive it? The man's face grew bleak. He lingered for a while and then said grimly, "There were a lot more transports in the convoy at the start of it, Captain. This is just the ones that remain. I have 340 free civilians in my care and 40 soldiers." Sonny sighed. Now things were making much more sense. Put in a somber mood, he asked, "There were no awakened assisting you?" The soldier shook his head. "There were. They stayed back to buy us time. That was a week ago, sir." Sonny thought that he understood the full picture, except for one most important thing. Why come so far south? He stared at the man for a bit, and then asked directly, "But why would you head here, of all places? Why not circle back and head north, to one of the remaining siege capitals?" The answer soon came, making the corner of his eye twitch. "Evacuation, sir. After the initial chaos died down, the awakened escorts, they were still alive back then, received orders through the dream realm. We were to proceed to a facility called Low 49, rendezvous with the battleship Ariadne that is supposed to be waiting for us there, and escape. Although we are a little late, just by a day or two." Sonny stared, lost for words. The soldier suddenly seemed excited. "Captain Sunless, sir, have you come from that facility? Were you sent to escort us the rest of the way?" Exposed to that hopeful gaze, Sonny felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He lingered with the answer, but his flaw only allowed him to remain silent for so long. Eventually, he opened his mouth and said simply, "No, the Ariadne was destroyed and Low 49 is lost. I am sorry to say this, soldier, but you and your men have made it all the way here for nothing." Sonny had never seen a few words crush a man's spirit so thoroughly. Except for maybe himself, when Nephi's had spoken his true name and commanded him to leave her for dead on the forgotten shore. The soldier managed to remain standing, but he looked like a marionette with its strings cut. All light was extinguished from his eyes. He remained motionless for a while, and then turned slightly, throwing a forlorn glance at the small, battered convoy behind him. Sonny could imagine how he felt. After surviving the cataclysmic destruction of the siege capital, these people weathered untold horrors to make it this far alive. What had kept them going was probably the hope that salvation was drawing closer and closer. And now, when they almost reached the destination, that hope was cruelly crushed. He sighed. "It just happened a few days ago. The news would not have reached you. My people and I are the only ones who survived." The soldier looked down, silent. Eventually he asked, "If I may ask, what are your plans now, sir?" Sonny looked at him with a deadpan expression. "My orders are to proceed to the Erebus Field siege capital, to rendezvous with another cohort of the 1st Irregular Company." Suddenly, a tentative spark appeared in the soldier's eyes. "Master Sunless, sir, will you consider?" Sonny knew what he was going to say. It was not that hard to guess. He wanted to laugh. In fact, he almost did. It took a lot of self-control to remain outwardly calm. A bitter, familiar, unhinged laugh got stuck somewhere in his throat. Of course, Sonny knew. The soldier was going to ask if the irregulars would escort the civilian convoy to safety. Why wouldn't he? They had persevered for the last week without any awaken to protect the handful of transports from the rampaging nightmare creatures. And even though their hope of sailing to safety aboard the Ariadne was gone, there was an actual master standing in front of them. And not just any master, but one of the most deadly ones in the First Army, accompanied by a cohort of absolute elites. The irregulars were the cream of the crop of human forces. Surely, they wouldn't leave defenseless civilians behind. Surely. The problem was that this decision was not an easy one. Heavily armored and exceedingly maneuverable Rhino could potentially make the 1,000-kilometer journey to Mount Erebus. The flimsy and damaged civilian transports, however, their ability to traverse the mountains was doubtful. At the very least, they would slow down and limit the versatile APC, which would put its crew in danger. By agreeing to take charge of the convoy, Sonny would not only make his task several times harder, but also drastically increase the chance of his own soldiers dying. That was why he wanted to laugh. In Sonny's last conversation with Vern, the stalwart master had told him that it was impossible to get hundreds of civilians through the mountains alive. Back then, Sonny had responded by saying that people could not know what was impossible until they tried it. And now he had to either leave these people to die, or eat his own words and put his money where his mouth was. "Oh, this is a good one. This one is great. I see you faded." The soldier's words died on his lips as he watched Sonny's unmoving face. Sonny remained silent. So what was he supposed to do? Was he supposed to take responsibility for hundreds of refugees at the expense of his soldiers and Professor Obel, or follow cold logic and do what had to be done, abandoning them to fate? No, but there was no need to hide behind words. There was no fate in this case, only death. What was the right choice? A strange smile appeared on his face. What would a man of conviction do? A man of conviction would have probably stayed at low 49 and died. How complicated. Despite his aspiration to find the elusive thing called conviction and grow stronger through it, Sonny had not had any success in that regard yet. He still stood for nothing and was as unmoored as he had been at the start of it. Some people might have had an unwavering moral compass, but he was not one of them. Sonny mostly acted on a whim and pursued his own narrow interests. In fact, simply hearing someone speak about morality always filled him with suspicion. So he did not have a straightforward answer to what was the right thing to do in this situation. However, Sonny might not have known what he believed in, if there even was such a thing, but he knew what he despised very well. Just a few days ago, he had sat on the roof of the Rhino, full of contempt for the bastards who could have saved countless lives in Antarctica, but decided not to. The damned sovereigns. So, following that logic, wouldn't he be doing the same by leaving the refugees to die in order to serve his personal convenience? What a weird and perverted way of thinking about things. Sonny was honestly not sure about the validity of that conclusion, or if it even made any sense, but it was the best one he had managed to come up with. So, after a long stretch of silence, he said, "How much food and clean water do you have left?" The soldier did not seem to understand his question. He stared blankly at Sonny for a few moments, and then perked up a little. "We have a large surplus of both food and water, sir. That is one thing we don't lack. We also have a working water filter." Sonny remained silent for a little while, and then nodded. "All right, then you will follow us to Erebus Field. Do note that we will be moving through the mountains. Don't worry, though. My cohort has scouted the road networks in this region of the Antarctic Center extensively. We'll guide you well." The soldier took in a shaky breath and saluted. Yes, sir. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then asked, "What is your name and rank?" The man responded after a short pause, fidgeting with the collar of his coat. "It's Sergeant Jeer, sir." Sonny glanced at the caravan of battered vehicles behind him and sighed. "Here's my order, Sergeant Jeer. From now on, I'll be assuming command of this convoy. You did well getting them here. Leave the rest to me." As expected, the refugees were devastated by the news that their salvation had slipped away from their grasp at the last moment. Many of them looked like they were about to give up, but strangely, the terrible change did not end up being as crushing to their already crumbling morale as Sonny had thought it would be. The reason he was the reason, or rather his status and reputation. Although being found by a master was not really comparable to boarding a rescue ship, ascended were a kind of symbol among humans. Saints were too mysterious and distant, so it was the masters that dwelled in the human subconscious as the epitome of valor, achievement, and might. Sonny did not know about valor and achievement, but ascended were indeed immensely powerful, and he was more powerful than most. So when the refugees learned that Master Sunless of the First Irregular Company had taken command of the convoy, many of them were elated despite their extreme exhaustion. He had a fearsome reputation. After all, in fact, Sonny felt that the mundane soldiers had gone out of their way to embellish his achievements as much as they could when they delivered the news. Their purpose was transparent. The soldiers, too, wanted to keep the morale of the civilians from reaching the very bottom of despair. As a result, the refugees regarded him as some sort of intrepid hero who was both the scourge of nightmare creatures and a dauntless savior of men. When they looked at him, their eyes were full of hope and reverence. Sonny was weirded out by these gazes. Fools, how easy are you to deceive? Did they not hear the part of the story where a whole settlement that he had been stationed at was completely destroyed? But no, they didn't. People just wanted to believe in something that would give them solace, no matter how far removed from the truth their belief might be. It was strangely easy for them to ignore anything that conflicted with such a belief. In the end, making people lie to themselves was the best and most effective kind of deception. Regardless, Sonny was not going to dispel their mistaken impression of him. Not only did it make the refugees easier to control, but there were other things to consider, namely, the spreading plague of the spell. Now that Sonny knew that a first nightmare was born of a tiny seed, as well, he couldn't help but feel that it could only be planted into fertile soil. Wouldn't a soul that was full of fear and despair be more fertile, while one illuminated by hope less so? If he thought about it like that, it was no surprise that the nightmare spell had descended during the height of the dark times. Back then, the whole world had been drowning in desperation. Maybe by managing the morale of the convoy, he would be able to reduce the number of mundane humans succumbing to the nightmares. Look at me, thinking strategically. Shaking his head, Sonny walked back to the rhino and climbed inside. Remembering the mangled corpse of an awakened demon that rested under the snow less than 100 meters away, he wanted to leave the terminus of the coastal highway as soon as possible. But there were a few things he had to do before that. "Professor Obel, can I speak to you?" The old man had lived through the havoc of the first generation, so he would have valuable insight about the task facing Sonny, without a doubt. And indeed, speaking to the professor gave him a few good ideas. However, something like the chain of nightmares had never happened in the history of the world before, so there was no handbook on how to survive it. He had to come up with his own solutions. 10 minutes later, Sonny gathered his cohort, as well as Professor Obel, Bate, and Sergeant Jeer in the command suite of the Rhino. He didn't waste any time and got straight to business. "The situation is far from being perfect, so I'll be brief. Our first task is to inspect the vehicles of the convoy and service them as needed to make sure that they will be able to make it across the mountains. However, we can't do it here in the open. There is an abandoned military bunker not too far from our position. If all goes well, we will reach it within a day and make camp." His thinking was rather simple. He couldn't have the civilians sleeping in the cramped transports, since the consequences of someone turning into a nightmare creature inside one would be devastating. So, ideally, they needed to find a well-protected campsite every time they needed to rest. The old bunker, which had stood empty since the dark times, was hidden in the mountains at a sufficient distance from the ocean. It was a good place to accomplish a lot of pressing tasks. Sonny paused and looked at his subordinates with a grim expression. "For now, we will assume a standard march formation. Our immediate task is to reach the bunker without suffering any losses. There are two types of threats we need to be wary of, those from beyond and those from within. I won't say anything about the former, since they just mean that we must enter battle with the enemy. The latter, however, I want soldiers keeping eyes on the civilians at all times. Don't let anyone fall asleep." He lingered for a moment and then added, "Clear one of the transports completely and move all passengers to the other four. That will be our mobile infirmary. If someone does fall asleep, wake them up. If they don't wake, transfer the sleepers to the infirmary and get ready to put them down, should anyone fail the first nightmare." Sergeant Jeer shivered, but remained silent. It wasn't easy for mundane soldiers to fight nightmare creatures, especially not without working exoskeleton armor suits, and inside a moving transport with no space to retreat and maneuver. Sonny had thought about it in advance. There were 5 civilian transports and 4 smaller army vehicles escorting them, so the math wasn't too hard. He looked at his soldiers. "Luster will drive the Rhino, while each of you is to be stationed inside one of the transports from now on. Keep the refugees safe and observe your surroundings. If the convoy is ambushed and the enemy gets past me, it's your job to make sure that no one dies, or at least as few of them die as possible. Bell, you will watch over the infirmary. The others, divide the transports among yourself. Sergeant Jeer, the crews of the military vehicles will be responsible for themselves. The same protocol applies." The soldier nodded. "Yes, sir." After that, they all stared at him in silence. Sonny raised an eyebrow. "What are you waiting for? Go, I want to get off the coast as soon as possible." After a short stop, the battered convoy started moving once again. The Rhino was driving at the front, followed by the 5 civilian transports. 2 military vehicles flanked them and 2 more protected the rear. It would not be possible to maintain the formation higher into the mountains, but for now, the roads were wide enough. Taking a turn, they drove away from the coast, slowly climbing higher and higher into the outskirts of the mountains. Observing the multitude of screens in the command suite of the Rhino, Sonny felt thankful for the fact that he had scouted this whole area with his shadows a month ago, while en route to Low 49. He roughly knew the twists and turns of the mountain roads, the shape of the slopes and the deep canyons, and what path to take. He knew where the most dangerous spots were, where a large-scale ambush could be waiting for them, and where it was possible to make camp. This stretch of the mountains was like a maze, and with civilian transports following the Rhino, its mobility was severely reduced. There were only so many paths the convoy could take. Luckily, Sonny remembered them all. Of course, a lot of things could have changed in a month. The devastating battle between the 3 Saints and an unknown Titan had destroyed a few mountain peaks further up north and caused a powerful earthquake. Although only a weak echo of that clash had reached this region, it was still enough to potentially change the topography. There would be rockfalls that had blocked previously clear roads, while some roads would have simply broken down and collapsed. A glacier or two could have come undone, obliterating everything in their path. And of course, there were swarms of nightmare creatures lurking in the dark. There was also snow. The blizzard seemed to be growing weaker, but it had already covered the world with it. As a result, the Rhino was forced to lower its wedge-shaped ram and clear the path forward for the convoy. Just like that, the proud war machine was reduced to playing the role of a snowplow. The progress was tortuously slow. Sonny had to simultaneously scout ahead and think deeply about how to manage the convoy. He wanted to consider as many problems as possible before they actually happened, to hopefully prevent them. It had been easy to command a small cohort, but now hundreds of people were depending on him. The complexity of the task and the amount of moving parts comprising it were giving him a headache. Not to mention the daunting trial of daring to guide a caravan of refugees through a war-torn, apocalyptic expanse of the continent that was being slowly devoured by the inescapable tide of darkness. At least there is no giant tower this time. Sonny smiled bitterly and turned his head, staring at Bate, who was looking at the external camera feed with a detached expression. Feeling his gaze, she looked back. "And what?" Sonny studied her for a few moments. "Bate, you have administrative experience, right?" The young woman frowned in confusion. "Sure, I used to do that sort of thing on behalf of the professor. Running a research facility demands a lot of paperwork, you know." He nodded. "Good, then congratulations. You're in charge of the refugees now." Bate blinked a couple of times. Wait, what do you mean?" Sonny shrugged. "I mean that you are responsible for their well-being. Food, water, health, morale. Find responsible people among the civilians and coordinate with them to solve any problems that you can handle yourself. Report the rest to me. You will be a filter between me and the civilians, understand?" She scowled. "I do, but my priority is the professor." Sonny shook his head and waved a hand dismissively. "He's a civilian too, is he not? Now that we are escorting a convoy of refugees, it's in your own interest to make sure that everything is running smoothly. The safer the convoy is, the safer the old man will be as well. In any case, I need to delegate these things to someone. Otherwise, I won't be able to concentrate on the military side of things, and our safety, including the professors, will be compromised. Would you prefer I entrust the civilian side of things to someone who does not care about him as much?" She glared at him for a few moments, then scoffed. "Fine, I guess I'll be the housekeeper then. You be the guard dog." Sonny grinned. "That sounds swell. From what I hear, all dogs do is sleep all day and get treats. Who wouldn't want to live like that?" The young woman gave him a strange look and didn't answer. Above a mountain road that clung to the side of a canyon, a tall cliff stood, covered in snow. On a deep ledge cutting into its face, veiled by darkness, a dozen monstrous forms lay as they hid from the howling wind. The nightmare creatures were resting, their bloodshot eyes staring aimlessly into the blizzard. Then something changed. As if catching a faint smell, the abomination stirred. Their maws opened, and their muscles rolled under the desiccated hides. One by one, they rose from the snow and listened. From a distance, a barely audible hum of engines and the rustle of wheels could be heard. Frenzied flames ignited in the eyes of the vile creatures, and hoarse growls escaped from their maws. Using their powerful limbs, the nightmare creatures moved toward the edge of the ledge, lusting to sink their fangs into human flesh. Before they could, however, a shadow suddenly moved between them, and something landed in the middle of the pack, sending snow flying into the air. The abominations only had a moment to see what it was. There between them, a graceful knight in intricate onyx armor stood, raising a beautiful jade giant. A split second later, the white blade flashed. Back inside the rhino, Sonny closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the voice of the spell whispering into his ears. The convoy was climbing higher into the mountains. They moved slowly, but had not encountered any serious problems yet. A few minutes later, he suddenly received a radio transmission from one of the flanking vehicles. "Mr. Sunnel, SS, sir." Sergeant Jeer's voice came through, marred by interference. Sonny manipulated a few switches to improve the quality and asked, What is it? Is there danger? The man answered after a short pause, with doubt in his voice. No, yes, I don't know, sir. It's just that the cliffside ahead, there's blood flowing down it. His voice sounded nervous. The response came a second later, startling the soldier. Don't mind it. The situation is under control. Keep your eyes open and move forward. Gier stared at the radio in his hand, and then glanced at the soldier near him. He said that the situation is under control. The other soldier shivered. Then I guess it is. They approached the cliffside that seemed to be seeping blood and drove past it. Nothing happened. A few more hours passed, full of similarly strange events. However, no abomination had managed to get close enough to the convoy to pose a serious threat to it. In the evening, when the blizzard had grown thin enough to see the stars in the sky, they finally reached their destination. Up ahead, hidden between tall cliffs, was the entrance to the old, abandoned bunker. That was going to be their base for the next couple of days. During the dark times, humanity had come to the brink of destruction. A series of cataclysmic natural disasters had brought it to its knees, causing several waves of mass migrations, each of them accompanied by plagues and famine. Previously, arable lands had turned into wastelands, and many resources that had previously been the lifeblood of civilization were suddenly running dry. There had not been enough food for everyone, not enough livable space for everyone, and not enough energy for everyone. So, humans had done what they knew best. They had turned to war. The marks left by those devastating wars still haunted the planet. From the polluted air to the derelicts of broken military machines, they littered the earth like scars caused by a deadly infection. The old bunker Sonny was facing right now was one of those scars. He knew neither what army had built it and for what purpose, nor what had happened to those people and why the bunker now stood abandoned. He also did not care. There were always stories about terrifying doomsday weapons hidden in such places, waiting to be unleashed by a carefree explorer, but most of them were just that, stories. In reality, places like that one were usually empty for one simple reason. Everyone had died or left, and those who survived had no need and no capacity to return. Plus, the bunker had already been unsealed a long time ago. Its massive blast doors stood open, covered with snow. Sonny was much more worried about the present than the past. Anything could have made its way inside during the chain of nightmares. If a tribe of nightmare creatures had made a nest in the narrow underground passages, laying siege to the bunker would not be easy. In fact, it was as tough of a task as a military unit could get. But he could not turn back. The civilian transports were crowding the mountain road behind him, with nowhere else to go. The vehicles needed maintenance and repair, and the people inside needed rest. It was his responsibility to provide for them. Looking at the dark entrance gloomily, Sonny turned and addressed his cohort. Prepare yourself. The 7 of us will enter the bunker in 15 minutes. Sergeant Gier, who stood nearby, hesitated for a few moments. Sir, what if there are nightmare creatures inside? Usually, the task of clearing an underground nest would only be entrusted to a much larger and better prepared force. Sonny stared at the soldier silently, and then shrugged. There are, so what? His shadows were already creeping through the dark bunker, scouting its many chambers and passages. There were indeed abominations hiding underground, a lot of them. They had turned the abandoned complex into their lair some time ago, and its nature was going to make any potential assault both hard to pull off and bloody. For a regular military force. Sonny and his people, however, were elites. He was confident in their ability to clear out the bunker without suffering any losses. They had no other choice anyway. Most of his confidence, though, came from himself. As minutes passed by, Sonny used his communicator to project an image on the snow and started to slowly fill it out as the irregulars watched attentively. Passage after passage, room after room. Soon, A detailed map of the bunker was projected in front of them. Then Sonny marked every nightmare creature and its position on the map. Lastly, he sketched a rough figure of a snake-like monstrosity and drew several red dots on its body. Those were the weak spots he had observed with Kim's help. Sergeant Jeer stared at the projection, dumbfounded. Not paying him any attention, Sonny addressed the irregulars. There are 94 nightmare creatures inside the bunker as well as several hundred eggs. The plan is simple. We'll go in and clear them all out level after level. The first 2 levels only have awakened abominations, and the heart of the nest seems to be situated on the 4th, with several fallen protecting it. There's not a lot of room to move, so mind the walls. Sam, leave the rifle behind. It won't be of any use underground anyway. He spent the remainder of the 15 minutes going over the important points and explaining what kind of enemy they would be facing. Then, without any fanfare, the cohort brandished their weapons and entered the bunker, disappearing into the darkness without a single radiant memory illuminating their way. Hidden in the shadows, Saint and Nightmare remained outside to guard the convoy. An underground nest was always a dire target. The lack of light, the unpredictable nature of the terrain, the twists and turns of narrow passages that could lead to an ambush at any second, the limited space that made it hard to move and fight. It was a nightmare for a cohort of awakened, especially if the abominations had both the numbers and the home ground advantage on their side. It wasn't too hard for the irregulars, though, because they knew where the enemies were, what the lay of the land was, and had already developed an optimal plan of attack. Even if something unexpected happened, Sonny's shadows were keeping an eye on everything, so the cohort would know about any potential attack in advance. Swiftly moving from room to room, from corridor to corridor, they methodically slaughtered the nightmare creatures. Despite being inside a beast lair, it appeared as though the abominations had found themselves inside an enemy stronghold instead. The awakened seemed to know the structure of the bunker better than its current inhabitants, as well as how to separate, flank, and box the monsters in. There were no unnecessary movements, no words spoken. The irregulars were fast, efficient, and deadly. Bell especially seemed to be born for this type of assault, since he could freely phase through walls and attack from any angle. His sword made short work of the monstrous snakes, striking precisely at the vulnerable sections that Kim's aspect had pointed out. Sonny was in full control of the situation. His shadows spread throughout the underground complex, informing him of the movements of the enemy. Whenever there was a possibility of danger appearing, his spear lashed out, obliterating the threat. Whenever there was a change, he adjusted the plan on the fly and informed his soldiers. They went through the first level like the Reaper's scythe, cutting down all living things on it, then did the same on the second. Then the third. In the end, not even the fallen abominations could do anything. The last rabid assault of the nightmare creatures was completely dismantled by an essence trap that had been set up by Samara. Whoever survived the blast was finished off by the melee fighters. Just like that, the deadly nest of powerful abominations was obliterated. As soon as the last of the creatures lost its life, shadows surged across the underground complex, dragging the corpses away to hide them out of sight. About an hour after the cohort had entered the bunker, Sonny emerged from the darkness and breathed in the cold air. Then, he looked at the soldiers waiting outside and calmly said, "Bring the transports inside." The soldiers stared at him for a few seconds in silence, then turned around and walked toward the vehicles without saying anything. What was there to say? The old abandoned bunker was not exactly the best place for a few hundreds of exhausted refugees to rest, and that had been before Sonny and his cohort had smeared monster blood all over the place. It was dark, cold, and in no way suited for people to live in. And yet, there was no other choice. They needed a temporary shelter to prepare for the journey ahead, and there was nothing better than this derelict facility for dozens of kilometers around. In the end, the civilian transports and the military vehicles entered the large hangar behind the blast doors, and the refugees disembarked, throwing frightened gazes at the dark interior of the bunker. The rest was both simple and demanded a lot of work. 6 comparatively clean rooms were designated as living areas, each welcoming around 70 residents. Lighting fixtures were installed, and heater elements were taken off the vehicles and placed in the corners to chase away the cold. Awakened were assigned to the living quarters to keep people safe. There was so much to do that Sonny was momentarily at a loss. People needed blankets, food, medical care, and 100 other things that he had not stopped to think about. Luckily, he did not have to solve all these problems alone. Sergeant Gier already had sufficient experience taking care of the refugees, and Bates seemed to have taken on her responsibility as the civilian representative with zeal. After about an hour of working things out, Sonny was left mostly alone. In the morning, there would be a lot to do, but for now, people just wanted to rest. No one knew when they were going to get a chance to leave the transports again. Sonny himself chose to watch over the infirmary, sending Belle away to a less stressful post. Currently, there were 3 people inside, 2 refugees and a young soldier. All 3 slept as their souls wandered in the first nightmare. Their shallow and rare breaths were almost inaudible. Glancing at them, he summoned his chair, sat on it, and prepared for a long night. Unlike the rest of the convoy, Sonny would not be resting anytime soon. There was too much for him to do. He closed his eyes. Above ground, the blizzard finally subsided, and the dark canvas of the mountains could be seen once again. The eerie lights of the aurora danced in the black sky, making it seem as though it was aflame with ghostly fire. Distant stars burned coldly up above. What a sight! Sonny relaxed as his shadows climbed 4 different peaks. Now that the blizzard was gone, he could finally observe the surroundings. He could control his shadows from as far as 13 kilometers or so. Of course, that number seemed small compared to the 1,000 kilometers the convoy had to travel to reach the Erebus Field siege capital. But here in the mountains, where the terrain was rough and uneven, that was enough. One could see a lot if they just climbed high enough. Naturally, trying to study the landscape from the summit of a tall mountain would have been hard for most people, considering that the whole continent was obscured by the veil of impenetrable darkness. The long night of Antarctica was still lingering, and would be for several more months. But Sonny could pierce through that veil with ease. To him, that darkness was an ally. As the first shadow reached sufficiently high, he sighed and opened his eyes. Then, he activated his communicator and projected the map of the area from its memory storage. So outdated. If Sonny wanted to guide the convoy through the mountains, he had a lot of tedious work to do. First, he recalled the journey to Low 49 and started to mark all the old roads that he had scouted back then on the map, as well as their condition and degree of disrepair. Some were too damaged for the civilian transports to drive on, some were comparatively fine, and some could be used, but only if there was no other option. In the process, Sonny also marked all points of interest, potential campsites, possible ambush spots, entrances to the old tunnels that could be hiding untold threats, and so on. The process was long and boring, but the result was going to allow him to plan a good route. After a while, feeling tired, Sonny glanced at the map and sighed. Its current state was satisfactory as the starting point. Then came the harder part. Relying on the 4 shadows looking at the world from high above, he started to add changes to the map. Some roads had been destroyed in the past month, some were blocked. Whole areas were buried under ice after several glaciers rolled down from the mountain peaks, and everywhere, nightmare creatures prowled. Due to his credentials as an academic explorer, Sonny was not a novice to drawing maps, although they had all been that of the dream realm in the past. The more he filled in the current one, the more bleak his expression became. Things were not looking good at all. There were too few paths the convoy could take, and none of them was particularly easy or safe. The sheer number of abominations flooding the mountain range was appalling. Even though Sonny could not judge their exact numbers and power from afar, there were too many. They were like maggots swarming in dead flesh. Nevertheless, he diligently marked the larger swarms on the map, as well as the direction they seemed to be heading in and their approximate speed. After hours of arduous work, the projection in front of him looked like a piece of psychedelic art, with a chaotic net of lines and symbols of different colors covering its surface. The most prominent color, however, was red. With a sigh, Sonny leaned back and remained motionless for a while. What a disaster! It would have been much easier to slip through the hordes of nightmare creatures if he only had to worry about the rhino. The APC could conquer all types of terrain and was as durable as they came. The vehicles of the convoy, however, Sonny felt as though he had gone into battle with his hands tied behind his back. Curse it all! As Sonny was pondering the optimal course of action, there was a sound of footsteps in the corridor outside, and the door of the infirmary slowly opened. Behind it, Professor Obel stood, holding a plate of food in his hands. Sonny raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unexpected visit. "Professor, what brings you here?" The old man smiled. "Ah, don't mind me, Master Sunless. I just noticed that you have not gotten your portion of the food the soldiers had cooked for us, so I thought to bring you some." Sonny hesitated for a few moments. What a thoughtful old man. Something told him that the professor had not just come here to give him food. Considering how much time had passed, the old man should have been asleep. It was also strange to see him without Bait, who always followed him like a shadow. The question was, what did Professor Obel want? Come in. The old man entered, closing the door behind him. Then he looked around, found a rusty stool and sat down, handing Sonny the plate. "Sorry, it's not much." Indeed, it wasn't. The broth the soldiers had cooked was made out of synth paste, monster meat, and spices. It was a common army dish that could be made with all kinds of ingredients, as long as there was water and basic rations at hand. This particular version looked almost edible, too. Sonny shrugged. "That's all right. I'm from the outskirts of NQSC, so I'm not a stranger to synth paste." Professor Obel nodded, then curiously studied the map Sonny had created as he ate. After a while, the old man said, "It is in moments like this that I am reminded of how potent utility aspects can be. Their wielders tend to be overlooked in favor of combat specialists, who get all the glory. But your ability is truly incredible. Someone more versed in battle would have been able to kill a few dozen more nightmare creatures, maybe even 100 or two. But with this, we will be able to sneak past thousands of them and defeat those that we do encounter with minimal losses or none at all. This map will vastly increase our chances of survival, more than any warrior would be able to." He paused for a moment and looked around. "This bunker, too. Your soldiers are a fearsome bunch, Master Sunless, but without your sight and awareness, liberating this outpost without casualties would have been a tall task even for them. You seem to be able to see everything and be in several places at the same time. I think I owe my life to that last ability of yours, actually." Remembering the bloody incident that had happened in the safe room of Low 49, Sonny swallowed a spoonful of broth and nodded. "That is a lot of compliments. Don't be mistaken, though. I am a menace in battle, too." Professor Obel chuckled. "I am just giving credit where credit is due. You might have not realized it, but you are uniquely suited to lead this convoy, Master Sunless. Still, it is a lot of responsibility, especially for a young man such as you. How are you holding up?" Sonny stared at him blankly. "I am fine, thank you. I've been through worse." The old man sighed. "I'm sure that you have." His tone seemed strangely regretful. What is he getting at? Sonny frowned, then asked frankly. Professor, I am sure that this is not just a social call. What is it that you want from me? Professor Obel remained silent for a few moments. Eventually, he smiled. I guess I am really easy to read, huh? Comes with the territory, I guess. At my age, people don't have time for pretense. Yes, you are right. I wanted to talk to you about something, Master Sunless, or rather, I have a favor to ask. He looked at Sonny with a fatherly expression, which was an entirely new experience for Sonny, and said, there is a long road ahead of us. In the future, you will have to make a lot of decisions as the leader of this convoy. Our lives are literally in your hands, Master Sunless. So, I wanted to ask you in advance. If a time ever comes when you have to decide between saving my life and that of someone else, especially my assistant Bait, that stubborn child, I want you to choose against me. Keep someone else alive and leave me behind. Sonny stared at the old man for a while, perplexed by the sudden request. With all due respect, Professor, I can't agree. My orders are to deliver you safely to a siege capital, you and you alone. Everyone else is just a bonus. They don't have the same value. Professor Obel simply shook his head. Value? You are wrong, Master Sunless. I am old and don't have much time left. It is young people like you and Bait that hold true value. I might have done a few worthy things in the past, but you are the ones who will accomplish great and amazing feats in the years to come. You will carry the flag of humanity into the future, not old fossils like me. If a species starts to cannibalize its young to prolong the lives of the old, there's no value in that, none at all. Sonny looked away. That's great, but I am not even sure if humanity has a future. The old man laughed. Oh, forgive me, young man, but I've been hearing these words for almost a century. When I was young, many people were convinced that we were all going to go extinct soon. But we didn't. Then they went around saying that if things did not change for the better, humanity would surely be doomed. Things changed for the worst, but humanity still persisted. Then the nightmare spell appeared, and it seemed like all their fears came true, and yet here we are, still kicking. Humanity is far more tenacious than you think, Master Sunless. That it was. Humans were incredibly adaptable, resourceful, and stubborn creatures. They tended to cling to life so ferociously that eradicating them was often a futile endeavor. But not always. Sonny glanced at the professor darkly. Humans that used to inhabit the dream realm were tenacious, too. Where are they now? The old man did not seem to have an answer, so he just sighed dejectedly. After a while he asked, so, are you going to grant my wish or not? Sonny remained silent for a bit, then he scoffed. Why do I have to choose whom to keep alive? I'll just make sure to save everyone. There's no need to decide between you and Bait, so why would I? Professor Obel looked at him with a slightly somber expression. That might be an unreasonable ambition, young man. Sonny shrugged, his expression nonchalant. This whole campaign is an unreasonable ambition. Should we just give up? The old man studied him for a while, then suddenly smiled. His smile, for some reason, seemed a bit brighter than usual. Indeed, that is also true. At that moment, Sonny glanced at the three people sleeping in the infirmary and frowned. His eyes seemed to grow a little darker. Deactivating his communicator, he looked at Professor Obel and said in a calm tone, I think it's time for you to go, Professor. I have some matters to attend to. Thanks for the food. The old man lingered for a moment, but then nodded and stood up. As soon as the door closed behind him, Sonny summoned the moonlight shard and walked over to the sleepers. It seemed that two of them were about to wake up, whether as people or nightmare creatures, though. That Sonny did not know. The first infected was a young soldier from Sergeant Jeer's unit. The other two were refugees, a man in his 30s and a woman who seemed old enough to be Sonny's grandmother. All three were outside the usual age for a sleeper, but the soldier, at least, was young and strong. He had a higher chance of survival, from what Sonny could tell. Not that anyone knew a lot about how and why people survived the first nightmare. It was a mystery why the spell had eventually settled for teenagers of about 16 to 18 years old, after devastating the first generation indiscriminately. But even back then, younger people had been more likely to survive. Humans might have not known the reason, but they were very good at gathering statistics. Perhaps it had something to do with the soul. Some believed that it was hard for a soul to form a stable core after becoming set in its ways. So, a situation was possible where an older person could survive their nightmare, only to die anyway after their soul collapsed while trying to create a core. That hardly seems fair. But fairness was a human concept in the end. The spell had its own principles, which did not always coincide with what humans considered just. Currently, the soldier and the male refugee were stirring, as if on the cusp of waking up. Sonny observed them from above, holding the moonlight shard in his hand. He was strangely fascinated. To his eyes, the changes happening to the souls of the sleepers were revealed in detail. The weak, faint golden light inside them was swirling and moving, caught in the throes of a growing turmoil. Sonny had gone through the process himself many times. However, he had never seen it happening in front of him to someone else. Right now, the souls of the two humans were weak and insubstantial. They were more like an idea of something than an actual thing. They were alive and had shadows, but that was pretty much it. However, through a mysterious process, the formless state of a mundane soul was being galvanized, slowly creating a more solid shape. A soul core was not a soul. Rather, it existed within the soul, serving as both its fulcrum and nexus. At least that was how Sonny perceived it. Encompassing a core granted a lot of benefits to a soul, but it also placed a burden on it. Not every soul was powerful and vast enough to sustain one, let alone several. The proof of it was the terrible pain he went through every time his class rose. Regardless, both the soldier and the civilian seemed resilient enough for the task at hand. The faint golden light saturating their bodies grew slightly brighter, and in it, streaks of a stronger radiance appeared. These streaks flowed to their chests and swirled, slowly merging into spheres of brilliant light. The whole process seemed miraculous. As the two spheres grew fuller and more defined, the familiar shapes of two soul cores started to emerge from the brilliance. But then there was a change. The nascent soul core of the young soldier exploded with a flood of ethereal flame, which rolled through his body as a radiant wave, rejuvenating it. The civilian, however, as Sonny watched with a bleak expression, a seed of darkness appeared in the center of the forming core. It quickly expanded, spreading like a cancerous growth. Repulsive veins of darkness spread through the dying light, consuming it. The more of the light was consumed, the faster it spread. In corruption, Sonny was almost certain that this was what he was observing, a living being succumbing to the corruption. The corruption had existed long before the nightmare spell, and although he did not know its source and purpose, he knew that it was an enemy. The enemy, perhaps. Sonny suspected that he had once come very close to becoming corrupted himself, on the second level of the Ebony Tower. The terrible rot that had eaten through Weaver's arm and forced the cunning demon to sever it, had it not been the same thing, only in a far more pure and harrowing form. As Sonny watched, revolting tentacles of the corruption spread through the body of the man, becoming one with it. Then the body started to change. The skin turned dark and the teeth suddenly elongated, piercing through his lips. The bones cracked, rearranging themselves. Before anything else could happen, though, the narrow blade of the moonlight shard pierced the man's chest, going straight through his heart. The forming soul core, now parasitized by the corruption, was torn apart. The grotesque body convulsed and grew still, its last breath escaping as a hoarse groan. Sonny sighed and looked at the dead man with regret. After a while, he whispered, "Rest well now, your nightmare is over. Find peace within me." Sonny lingered for a few moments, then glanced at the other one. Everything seemed to be going fine for the young soldier. His soul core was all but formed, as there were faint streams of weak essence coursing through his body. The body itself was being rebuilt by it, growing healthier and stronger, getting one step closer to perfection. Before too long, the convoy would welcome another sleeper. Sonny remained motionless for a while, then dragged his chair closer and sat down, dismissing the moonlight shard. Several shadowy tentacles rose from the ground and dragged the corpse of the unfortunate refugee away. Come to think of it, they were not too practical for such tasks. A simple tentacle was the easiest shape to create and demanded the least essence to maintain, but came short in terms of function and versatility. Maybe he needed to come up with a better shape. In any case, for now, all Sonny could do was wait. Suddenly, he felt very tired. By that time, the first of the shadows had already returned from its trip to the peak of a nearby mountain, so he closed his eyes and observed the infirmary through it. A minute passed by, then another, then a few more. Everything was quiet. Some time later, the soldier slowly opened his eyes. A hint of consciousness returned into them, and the young man looked around in confusion. The scarcely lit room, the rusted metal walls, the three makeshift cots, one of them drenched in blood, and a pale youth sitting on a luxurious wooden chair, as if on a humble throne. The youth seemed almost like a human. Was he human? His eyes were closed. Was he alive or was he a corpse? Was he both alive and a corpse? In that moment, Sonny said, "What are you looking at?" The soldier flinched away. Then, shivering, he asked something stupid. "Am I dead?" Sonny frowned. Well, it was not surprising that the guy was confused. He had been lost in the first nightmare for several days. For all the poor fool knew, the convoy should have been still driving toward Low 49, racing to rendezvous with the Ariadne. He had slept through the meeting with the irregulars, Sonny assuming command, and the short journey to the bunker. To him, everything would appear strange and frightening. With a sigh, Sonny opened his eyes, leaned forward, and then slapped the soldier across the face. Not too hard, but just enough to feel it. As the young man yelped and grabbed his cheek, Sonny shook his head. "Would it hurt like that if you were dead? You're not lucky enough to die, fool. Welcome back to the waking world, sleeper. Whatever your name is." Devils were the only awakened in the convoy, so the newly returned sleeper had no one else to learn from. After finding out that the young soldier's aspect had to do with melee combat, Sonny sent him to Bell and told the swordsman to show him the ropes. The sleeper was in a strange position. He was not a mundane soldier anymore, but also not a true awakened. He had an aspect, an ability, and was capable of summoning memories. However, his power was barely enough to face a dormant nightmare creature, and potent memories with active enchantments were wasted on him. "Whatever, I was killing fallen devils left and right as a sleeper." Sonny sneered. Of course, no matter how much he wanted to, he could not hold everyone to the standards of the Forgotten Shore survivors. Everyone who had escaped from that hell was abnormal, and for every one of them that had, there were hundreds of those who had not. In any case, the sleeper was at least capable enough to watch over the refugees, lessening the burden on the irregulars. To make his task easier, they had bestowed a few memories to the young man. Now, he was wearing sturdy snakeskin armor and wielding Bell's spare sword. He even had an enchanted bow and a quiver of poison arrows, as well as a magical lantern and a charm that protected him from cold. If there was one thing the irregulars did not lack, it was memories of lower ranks. Pretty much every battle they fought resulted in one or two of them receiving something. Most of these memories were useless to the members of the cohort, whose equipment had been of high quality even before Sonny improved it, but they were just right for a new sleeper. There was enough to arm several more, even. Come to think of it, Sonny had been mostly paying attention to the human toll that the rampant proliferation of the spell had levied, but there was another side to the epidemic devouring Antarctica as well. Before too long, there would be a lot of sleepers like that one on the continent. So many, in fact, that their numbers could potentially rival that of the evacuation army in the future. That belated realization gave him pause. Those were thoughts for the future, however. For now, he only cared about the convoy and its fate. The convoy was not going to have thousands of sleepers protecting it any time soon, but there might be enough of them to form a cohort of their own one day. Well, I better tell Belle to do a good job of mentoring that guy, then. With that, he threw the thoughts about the sleeper out of his mind for now. There was a lot to do, and not enough time to do it all. In the morning, Sonny sent Quentin, Samara, and Kim to take a look at the vehicles of the convoy. Each had to be inspected, serviced, and hopefully repaired well enough to make the journey to Erebus Field in one piece. At the same time, he assigned Dorn and 20 of Gyr's soldiers to explore the bunker and see if there was anything inside that could be recovered and used for their benefit. The underground complex had stood abandoned for half a century, at least, but there was a possibility that a few intact pieces of machinery remained, ready to be cannibalized to repair the vehicles. There could also be untouched caches of preserved provisions, and so on, not to mention the carcasses of nightmare creatures that needed to be dressed and dismantled. Every member of the cohort already had their cores saturated, so there was no better use for all the remaining soul shards than to feed them to the rookie sleeper. Just like that, the young soldier was going to consume hundreds of soul fragments in his very first day after returning from the nightmare. What a lucky bastard! Recalling how arduous it was for him to get even a single fragment on the forgotten shore, Sonny listened to Bate with a dim expression. She was in the process of reporting what state the refugees were in, which, if put succinctly, was not too good. Well, what else had he expected? It was already a miracle that these people were holding on to their sanity. Many of them were the most vulnerable members of humanity, too, children and elderly. The shock of watching their whole continent go up in flames right in front of them was not something one could endure without paying the price. With a sigh, Sonny summoned the covetous coffer and started unloading the precious things he had stored inside in preparation for the Antarctica campaign. Quality food, sugar, salt, spices, dried fruit, chocolate, tea, coffee, toiletries, expensive alcohol for special occasions, and much more. He had prepared a lot, thinking that this stash was going to last the cohort at least a year. There was even foldable furniture, a spacious field tent, and a few things to make leisure time between missions more enjoyable. Bate watched more and more items appear from an average-sized chest with wide eyes. Sonny, meanwhile, felt extremely bitter. The mountain of supplies was large enough to fill an entire room. Not too long ago, it seemed like a lot, but with hundreds of mouths to feed, it was barely enough to sustain the refugees for a few days. However, the supplies were not meant to sustain them. Sergeant Gyr had that covered, even if all the civilians had to eat was synth-paste broth, and all they had to drink was filtered water. Rather, Sonny's pile of treasures was supposed to achieve something different, improve their mood, even if just by a bit. Enduring the apocalypse was much more bearable if you had some toothpaste and a clean toothbrush. Although that statement seemed nonsensical and foolish, it was nevertheless, somehow, true. Sonny had experienced the fact himself. Here, talk to Gyr and distribute this stuff among the civilians. Tell the cooks to step up their game, too. I want the next few meals to be really tasty, until we leave the bunker at least. Bate, who was staring at a pack of cheap scented soap as if mesmerized by it, slowly nodded. Ah yes, I will, huh? Sonny sighed and clicked his fingers a few times, fruitlessly trying to get the young woman's attention. Damn, Do I need to slap her, too? In the end, they stayed in the derelict bunker for 3 days. The vehicles of the convoy had turned out to be in a worse state than Sonny had thought, so it took a lot of work for Kim and Samara to get them in shape with Quentin's help. The patchwork repairs they implemented were not pretty, but at least the transports were not going to fall apart on the road, stranding dozens of refugees and bringing the convoy to a halting stop. In the freezing cold of the polar night, stopping meant death. That was without even considering the swarms of nightmare creatures prowling in the dark. The world itself was more than happy to kill them. Throughout these few days, Sonny continued to monitor the surroundings and diligently update his map. The four shadows spent a lot of time either climbing mountains or hiding on their icy summits. He knew for a fact that shadows did not experience getting cold, and yet, Sonny could not shake the feeling that the gazes they threw at him from time to time were less friendly than usual. Tough, do as you're told and don't complain, bastards. He was not a very friendly person himself. The days spent in the bunker were strangely uneventful. There were no large hordes of nightmare creatures in close proximity to it, yet, and whatever small swarms passed by were not strong enough to pose a serious threat. If they did attack, the abominations would have a hard time assaulting the underground complex. Its defensive capabilities, which Sonny and his cohort had braved themselves while clearing out the snake monsters, were now on their side. No one would find it easy to get to the civilians. Unless they were capable of burrowing through the ground, of course, like the monstrous lieutenant of the stone hive that had almost buried Sonny in solid stone. If they were, the bunker would become nothing short of a free buffet for such a nightmare creature. After thinking about that, Sonny ordered Luster to remain in the Rhino and monitor the seismic sensors like his life depended on it. But no dangerous abomination appeared. When Sonny was free, he silently patrolled the bunker, studying the refugees. These people seemed strange to him. After losing their homes, loved ones, and having the promised salvation be ripped out from their hands twice, he would have expected many to break. And some did, but very few. For most, life simply went on, especially the children. The last thing Sonny had expected to hear in the gloomy corridors of the abandoned bunker was the sound of laughter, but nevertheless there it was. Kids were playing around, watched over by the elderly. They ran around, made friends, and invented various games to chase away the boredom. One even had the gall to slam directly into him while chasing after their playmates. The boy let out a startled yelp, then looked up with wide eyes and mumbled, Sorry, Uncle," awakened. With that, he rubbed his forehead and dashed away, giggling. Sonny blinked a couple of times. Uncle, the nerve. Who was he calling an uncle? Kids were doing fine, but even the adults, pressed down by the burden of knowledge, showed pale smiles from time to time. They were warm, had both water and food, as well as a temporary but safe shelter. That was all it took for the human spirit to hold on, it seemed. Maybe Sonny himself had something to do with their mood as well. The refugees decided to trust in the competence of the master who had taken charge of their survival. They surrendered their fates into his hands and, unburdened, found enough strength to believe in the future, even if only a little. Strange, so strange. I would never entrust my life to anyone. At the end of the third day, Sonny gave the command to start preparing for an immediate departure. That decision was met with a lot of turmoil, both from the civilians and the soldiers. Even his own men spoke up. Sir, if I may. Samara gestured to the ramshackle vehicles, slight concern apparent on her usually nonchalant face. We have done a lot, but I am not sure how well our repairs will hold. If you give us 2 more days, maybe even 1, we'll accomplish much more. Bate and Sergeant Gier were similarly in favor of postponing the departure by a few days. The people are just starting to come to their senses. A few more days of rest will do wonders for both their mood and their health. We have a lot of old people here, you know. They require care." But Sonny was adamant. He simply shook his head. "You don't get it. We must leave now. There is a huge horde of nightmare creatures moving in from the east and another one coming down from the north. If we go now, we'll have a chance of slipping past them before they arrive. If not, we'll simply drown in abominations. Do you actually think that they won't find us underground, or that 7.5 Awakened can stop them? Wake the hell up and start loading people into the transports. That's an order." No one could challenge his authority, and no one had any reason to. While hard to accept, his words were true, which was to be expected, considering that Sonny could not lie. He would have loved to lie and manipulate these people, but sadly, he could only manipulate them by telling the truth. Weirdly enough, he was starting to earn a reputation of a rough but fair leader as a result. Who could be more dependable than the devil, after all? After 3 days of rest for some, and backbreaking work to prepare the convoy for the journey ahead for others, the small fleet of vehicles finally left the hangar of the old bunker. The blizzard had yet to come back, so their position was instantly revealed to everyone who would bother to look. Cutting the darkness with beams of bright light and tearing the silence apart with the rumbling growls of powerful engines, the convoy moved north. Their long journey had begun. Next, in the cold darkness, a small procession of vehicles was climbing an old and battered mountain road. The road clung precariously to the stone slope, so narrow that the wheels of the transports barely fit on its cracked surface. Looking through the windows to their right, all the refugees could see was a sheer drop. It was as though they were driving on nothing, a few centimeters away from plummeting to their deaths. From time to time, a stray rock would be pushed off the road by the wheels of the slowly moving vehicles and then fall down, ricocheting off the cliffs with startling clangor. The sound traveled far through the deep gorge, reflecting from its stone walls as it grew louder and louder. For the frightened refugees, it seemed as deafening as thunder. Their fear was only made worse by the darkness. The headlights of the transports cut wide swaths through it, but beyond that, the night was impenetrable and oppressive. The drivers were already struggling with keeping the vehicles on the narrow road, and with most of it obscured by the chilling gloom, their task seemed all but impossible. Traveling through the mountains at night was an ill-advised and perilous affair. It was a fool's errand. Who's the fool then? Studying sensor feeds in the command suite of the Rhino, Sonny was mentally calculating the rate of their progress. No matter how he thought about it, the convoy's speed was appallingly slow. Sadly, it couldn't be helped. The powerful APC was moving at the head of the column, clearing the path for the other vehicles. Its ram was lowered and once again serving to push through the snow. From time to time, the Rhino had to remove other obstacles from the road, as well stone debris, large boulders, and massive chunks of ice that had split from the glacier at the peak of the mountain. It was doing a good job of it, for the most part. Very rarely did they stumble on something that the Rhino could not move through or push away. In these instances, the whole convoy had to come to a halt and wait for Sonny to remove the obstacle that the APC could not handle safely with his own 2 hands. The Rhino was a powerful machine, but it could not compare to the might of a master. There were very few things that Sonny could not throw off the road, and even if there were, he would simply cut through them with the sin of solace. The jade blade of the beautiful giant was sharp enough to cut through granite as if it was water. Not that he enjoyed listening to its invasive whispers. In any case, each such stop made their already slow progress even slower. The darkness, the cold, the precarious nature of the old mountain roads, the rough state of the area after the recent earthquake, none of it was making Sonny's life easy. And that was just the natural side of things. Of course, there were other threats around them as well. The whole region was teeming with nightmare creatures. For now, Sonny had managed to lead the convoy past the large swarms of abominations, but it was only a question of time before they had to fight. With how much noise they were making and how much light they were producing, it was inevitable for something hungry to notice them. Some already had, of course. However, Saint had been able to kill the few solitary nightmare creatures without drawing too much attention. Sunny was using her as an outrider, so she traveled apart from the convoy to intercept any emerging threats before they could deal damage to the transports. He did not know how long her protection would last them, though. Sunny felt as though the envelope of safety around the convoy was getting smaller and smaller. At least he and his soldiers could see through the darkness. If they were as blind as the mundane soldiers protecting the convoy, Sunny would have probably gone mad by now. As it was, he remained surprisingly calm and analytical. To him, the situation was both simple and unreasonably difficult. There were two types of things at his disposal. One of them was assets, Saint and Nightmare himself, the irregulars and the mundane soldiers. The other was dependents, the refugees, as well as Professor Obel and Bait. There were also four types of danger facing him. One was the nightmare creatures, whom he had to track through his shadows and either avoid or slay. The other was the threats from within, people succumbing to the spell or going mad, which he could mitigate through various measures. The third was the environment itself. The world could easily kill them without even needing the help of the abominations, but that could be dealt with as well. And finally, there was the fourth kind of danger, the most dire one, the unforeseen threats. That one could not be preempted, dealt with, or mitigated. Sunny's task was simply to apply his assets in the correct way in order to protect his dependents from the danger. However, even if he made all the right decisions, nothing stopped a new gate from opening right in the middle of the convoy, so there was that to think about as well. Great, and on top of it all, were too slow. Not only was the convoy too slow to escape from an attack if need be, they were also desperately behind schedule. At that rate, the refugees would have to spend a night or two inside the transports instead of a comparatively safe campsite. Well, there's nothing I can do about that for now. If he had better vehicles, if he had more awakened, if there were more tools at his disposal. Sunny sighed. There was no point in thinking about such things. At that moment, his expression slightly changed. Sunny looked to the side, as if piercing the hull of the rhino with his gaze. There, several kilometers ahead, the slopes of the gorge came together, forming a small valley with a frozen lake taking most of its surface. A swarm of nightmare creatures had just appeared from behind a tall rock protrusion and was descending toward the lake. And on the other side of the valley, still hidden from sight by the slope of the mountain, there was another swarm, this one smaller, but composed of much more powerful abominations. They were heading in the same direction. What Sunny had feared came true. The convoy could not turn back and would not be able to avoid colliding with the two swarms. A fight was inevitable. The corner of his mouth twitched. Standing up from his seat, Sunny stretched his limbs and then glanced at the irregulars with a deadpan expression. His people instantly tensed. Summon your weapons. It's time to get some fresh air. From what Sunny had seen, each of the two groups of nightmare creatures was about as strong as the swarm of eyeless abominations his cohort had eradicated at the very start of the Antarctica campaign. The first swarm consisted of about 200 creatures, most of them awakened, with several dozen fallen leading them. The second was further away and much smaller, with no more than 50 creatures comprising it. However, all of them were fallen, and there were 4 corrupted among them. Fighting each of the swarms separately would have been hard, but not impossible. But if they were allowed to join forces, Sunny did not know what would happen then. There was a faint hope in his heart that the nightmare creatures would obliterate each other, but he knew that it was too improbable at that stage. Whatever animosity there was between these two tribes of abominations could not compare to their frenzied desire to devour humans, and with hundreds of defenseless civilians close by, that bloodlust was already starting to flow like fire through their veins. A battle was inevitable. The question was, how was he supposed to go about fighting that battle? The best possible solution would have been to stop the onslaught of abominations near the convoy, on the narrow mountain road. There was no space here for the enemy to exploit their overwhelming numerical advantage, so the defenders could face them a few at a time. However, nightmare creatures were not known for their reason and strong sense of self-preservation. They would madly press on, potentially burying Sonny and his cohort in an avalanche of bodies. It would not matter how many of them ended up being cut down or falling into the abyssal chasm of the mountain gorge, as long as some could sink their fangs into human flesh. Additionally, he did not know what strange powers the abominations possessed, so he could not guarantee that the convoy would not sustain damage. But most importantly, Sonny simply could not let the two swarms merge. The only chance of a swift and decisive victory he saw was to obliterate them before that happened, which meant that the irregulars had to advance and face the enemy on the wide, open battlefield of the valley ahead. They had to either destroy one swarm before the second arrived, or somehow engage both at the same time. Otherwise, a lot of people would die. Curses! The rhino had already stopped, forcing the vehicles moving behind it to follow suit. The APC's width blocked pretty much the whole road, so they couldn't move past it even if they wanted to. Sonny and his people had to climb to the roof through one of the upper hatches and then jump down. Before too long, Jeer's distorted voice came through the speakers of a portable radio. "Captain Sunless, is there another obstacle?" Sonny lingered for a few moments, then responded in a measured tone. "Negative. There's trouble ahead. Deploy your soldiers and prepare to defend the convoy. My cohort will advance to engage the enemy, but if something gets past us, it will be up to you and your men to stop it." Sadly, Jeer couldn't do much. There was the lone sleeper, and a small amount of charged ammunition that Samara had supplied to the soldiers before leaving the bunker. The charge wasn't supposed to have dissipated completely yet, so they had a few hours left to make use of the few enchanted bullets. However, that was pretty much it. Without even the powered exoskeleton armor suits, mundane soldiers were no match for nightmare creatures above the dormant rank. Jeer's answer came after a few seconds of silence. "Understood. What to do, what to do?" Looking ahead, Sonny feverishly went through numerous scenarios, calculating risks and trying to come up with a way out of the dire situation, one that would not spell disaster for the convoy. No matter how he looked at it, something had to be sacrificed to balance the scale in their favor. His mind was running on all cylinders, but failing to come up with a decision. Soon he gritted his teeth and commanded the irregulars to advance. They dashed forward, braving the snow in cold silence. It did not take long to reach the small valley. They managed to arrive at its edges before the first swarm of nightmare creatures had time to descend from the mountain, but just barely. There was maybe a minute or two left. The second swarm was still some distance away, hidden behind a tall slope. In front of them was a large, empty space. It was covered with snow and almost perfectly flat. That was because most of the valley was taken by a mountain lake, which was frozen now that the long night had come to Antarctica. This was where they were going to fight. Soon, the pristine surface of the snow would be painted by blood, hopefully, of nightmare creatures, but maybe that of humans too. Sonny ordered his soldiers to hide behind tall boulders and climbed on top of one. Then, he summoned Morgan's warbow and closed his eyes for a moment. He was just not strong enough. There were just too few assets at his disposal. This damned war was just too unfair. Someone had to stop the larger swarm, and someone had to stall the smaller but more powerful one. Someone had to advance, while someone had to stay back and defend the convoy. There was simply no way to achieve all these goals without suffering a loss of something, and even though Sonny knew what decision he had to make, it was not easy to make it. A sorry saint. His loyal demon would have to pick up his slack and face the second swarm with just Nightmare by her side. He could not even spare a shadow to reinforce them. One was watching over the convoy, and he needed the other three himself. Saint had always been an outstanding warrior, but even she was not capable enough to handle 50 fallen and 3 corrupted abominations alone. The black steed would be of help, of course, especially now that he had subjugated a lot of nightmares, but still, the odds were not in their favor. If left to face the enemy alone, both shadows would eventually be destroyed. That was why speed was of the essence. If the irregulars handled the larger swarm fast enough, they would be able to come to Saint's rescue. If not, Sonny would have to either risk losing his shadows or dismiss them and compromise the lives of the irregulars, who would then be attacked from 2 sides. Kim, I need your help. With a grim sigh, he raised his bow and pulled on its string. A black arrow noiselessly flew through the darkness of the moonless night and disappeared into white snow without a trace. Then, another. Sonny tried to send as many arrows flying as he could before the swarm arrived. In the end, he managed to draw his bow 14 times. Knowing that he would have to, and hopefully, have time to rescue Saint, he had chosen to wear the mantle of the underworld into the upcoming battle. The dying wish was already fused with it, but Sonny had not poured his essence into the transcendent charm yet, not wishing to draw attention to himself. For now, he was just a black silhouette on the dark backdrop of the night, almost unnoticeable if not for the pale radiance of the crimson aurora that swirled above, devouring the skies with its ghostly light. Soon, the swarm descended into the valley. The nightmare creatures were bestial in appearance, with dirty fur and emaciated, gaunt frames that brimmed with feverish power. Their snouts were long and narrow, revealing hungry maws with black tongues and countless fangs, all sharp enough to cut through metal. The fallen abominations were especially ferocious. Their lean bodies were twice the size of Nightmare and had bloody bone protrusions rising from the patchy fur, like morbid armor. Their tails resembled slithering snakes, and their long black tongues were dripping with venomous saliva. Sonny had not encountered this type of abomination before. 2 months into the Antarctica campaign, the First Army had learned a few things about the chain of nightmares. Despite all the precautions, many awakened had been pulled into the dream realm by the call. Most of them never returned, but 2 or 3 managed to locate the seed and survive its trial, thus becoming masters. They had all brought the same story back. There was a previously unknown region of the dream realm where countless nightmare seeds seemed to be blooming, sending myriads of nightmare creatures into a frenzy. It was a vast desert covered by eerie ruins, with a giant black pyramid sometimes appearing on the horizon like a dreadful mirage. Considering that most of the gates originated from the same cursed land, it was no surprise that the nightmare creatures arriving into the waking world through them were also often similar. The first evacuation army had battled the same tribes of abominations many times. The eyeless, for example, were a common sight throughout Antarctica, so humans had developed methods of dealing with them. But these black tongues were new. Sonny had never seen or heard about them before. "Come down, you bastards." Lowering Morgan's warbow, Sonny crouched and disappeared into the embrace of the shadows. Surrounded by them, he was all but invisible, which was good, because he did not want the abominations to notice him yet. Following his command, the members of the cohort were also hiding, even if it meant giving up the opportunity to bombard the nightmare creatures with ranged attacks during the approach. Sonny had ordered them to wait for his signal. Seconds passed torturously slowly. The wind howled through the mountains, bringing with it the fetid smell of blood and rot. Cursing silently, he gritted his teeth. Somewhere not too far away, Saint and Nightmare must have already engaged the second swarm. Sunny had expected to hear a litany of furious howls, but to his surprise and unease, all he could hear was the wind. 3 of his shadows were with him, wrapped around the bow, while the 4th one was with the convoy, so Sunny could not even see what was happening behind the mountain slope. The lack of information was driving him insane, and his muscles ached, begging him to explode into action. But following the plan, he forced himself to remain motionless. Sunny needed the whole swarm of black tongues to descend into the valley before he launched his attack. Hurry, you damned wretches! There is no way you have not seen, heard, or smelled the convoy. Aren't you hungry for some delicious human flesh? After a minute or so, the last of the abominations finally reached the flat surface valley. The mass of bestial bodies flowed south, aiming to cross the frozen lake. They were clearly moving with purpose, aware that there was prey nearby. Nearer than you think. Sunny waited until the swarm reached the middle of the lake, and then finally started to act. Concentrating, he poured his essence into Morgan's warbow. However, he did not draw the string again. Instead, he activated the Burden of Peace enchantment, causing the 14 arrows he had sent flying earlier to suddenly become unbearably heavy. Maintaining and controlling so many arrows at the same time was not an easy task, even for him. Sunny had to test the limits of his essence control and concentration to achieve what he wanted. It felt like he would cough blood and faint soon. But in the end, Sunny had passed that test. Each of the arrows had sunk into a weak spot of the ice sheet covering the lake, which he had found with Kim's help. Now that all 14 of them were suddenly bearing down on the ice with crushing weight. The ice started to crack. Slow at first, and then faster and faster, a net of cracks spread under the snow, as if a massive pane of glass was breaking. An indescribably beautiful sound of shattering ice drowned the howls of the wind for a few moments, and the nightmare creatures tensed. But it was too late. Before they could do anything, the surface of the lake beneath their feet broke, sending hundreds of abominations into freezing cold water. Instantly, the vast space of pristine snow was no more, replaced instead with a scene of utter havoc. Massive pieces of ice were collapsing and overturning, as countless nightmare creatures fell into the utterly black, unbearably cold water below. They struggled to climb back onto something solid, but there was nothing to support their weight anymore. The whole swarm was being swallowed by the lake. Of course, cold water was not going to kill a nightmare creature. They weren't going to drown either. If need be, the abominations would swim to shore or simply walk on the bottom of the lake until they reached the surface again, breaking through the ice on the other side. For monsters like these, being thrown into a freezing lake was a small hindrance at most. Letting out a low growl, Sunny rose to his feet and drew Morgan's warbow once again. This time, a different kind of arrow appeared on its string. A strange arrow that looked like a caged bolt of lightning. Wrapping 3 shadows around the strike of thunder, Sunny did not bother to aim and simply let go of the string, sending the ascended arrow into the middle of the lake. The moment the furious bolt of lightning touched the surface of the water, there was a blinding flash, and Sunny was momentarily blinded. Before he regained his sight, the voice of the spell spoke into his ear like a choir. You have slain a. You have slain a. You have slain a. You have received a memory. You have received a memory. You have slain a. You have slain a. The spell kept whispering, the rich tapestry of its voice creating a strange harmony with itself. The result was almost distracting. Sunny instantly lost count of how many creatures he had killed with that single arrow, but it seemed to be close to 100 at least. The swarm was nothing short of decimated. Half of the black tongues were dead, and the remaining half were fried and damaged to different degrees. The water of the mountain lake, which had been freezing cold just a few seconds ago, seemed to be boiling. He had also been lucky enough to receive a bunch of memories. Even if most of them came from awakened abominations, Saint was definitely going to eat well tonight. If she survived, that is. Before Sonny could come back to his senses, the familiar electric whine reached his ears. Samara was already aiming her heavy rifle. Its muzzle flashed, and in the next moment, the head of a wounded fallen abomination that was trying to climb onto a large piece of ice exploded into bloody chunks. A split second later, Kim's carbine was firing too. Right. Any other master could have probably spared a few moments to appreciate the unbelievable feat of slaying 100 powerful nightmare creatures in less than a second. But Sonny did not have such luck. He was still racing against time, and there was still an entirely different swarm of abominations for him to fight. The pristine white expanse of the mountain valley was gone. Instead, all he could see was black water with charred corpses floating in it, and scores of viciously burned nightmare creatures feverishly trying to get to the shore. Abandoning their attempts to climb onto the ice, they were diving down into the lake instead, to travel across its bottom. Since electricity only spread over the surface of water, summoning the strike of thunder for the second time was not going to do him any good. Glancing at the macabre scene, Sonny turned his head and spoke. "Dorn, I'll leave you in charge. The bastards sustained a lot of damage and will be vulnerable while trying to break through the ice. Have Samara take out the strongest ones and finish off the rest as they come up with Bell and Luster." The giant man nodded, staring at him with a very strange expression. "Understood, but Captain, what about you?" Sonny was already jumping off the boulder. "I'll go deal with the second swarm." Dorn blinked. "There is a second swarm." Sonny did not hear it, though. Turning into a swift shadow, he flew through the darkness as fast as he could, rushing to the spot where he had sent Saint to. "Hold, hold, hold. Hold just a little bit more, Saint, I'm coming." Soon he crested the sheer wall of the mountain slope and froze for a moment, looking down. Far below, in a narrow ravine, a furious battle was taking place. The nightmare creatures resembled grotesquely tall humans with inky black skin, sunken eyes, and motionless faces. They were wearing strange armors forged out of dark metal and wielded no weapons. However, Sonny had a strong feeling that being touched by their empty hands would be the end of him. Their mouths were also sewn shut. No wonder there were no howls. Saint was the silent type, and these wretches were the same. She was currently facing 3 of the 4 corrupted abominations alone. Corpses littered the ground, and the sin of Solace danced, deflecting one blow after another. The taciturn demon had abandoned her usual grounded style and was now fighting with composed but desperate urgency. Looking at it, Sonny could not help but be reminded of the first time he met the living statue, back on a desolate plaza of the Dark City. Back then, the original Stone Saint had slain several creatures of a higher rank, at the cost of her life. The 4th corrupted was wandering aimlessly, straining to rip the black threads piercing its lips open. Inky blood was smeared all over its eerily still face. The creature's mind seemed to be gone, shattered by the cursed blade. However, Saint was also wounded, ruby dust flowing through the cracks of her onyx armor. She was slowly losing strength. Some distance away, Nightmare was holding back dozens of fallen abominations. The black steed rampaged in their midst, using its iron hooves, bestial strength, and wolfish fangs to tear them apart. His body was wreathed in shadows, with 2 crimson flames glowing furiously through the haze of darkness. The black steed looked like an incarnation of fear and dread. But he was not doing well, either. For now, Nightmare was able to stay ahead of the enemy due to his overwhelming speed, but he could not allow the abominations to swarm Saint from the back. Every time they tried, the dark courser had no choice but to give up his advantage and put himself between the voiceless and his rider. His sides were torn, and there were strange marks lingering on his sable coat, glowing with ghostly blue light. Around these marks, Nightmare's flesh seemed to be rotting. The two shadows were no match for the swarm of dreadful abominations, which seemed to have come from a Category 3 gate. They could escape from the voiceless wraiths, but they could not defeat them, only be defeated. Saint and Nightmare only lasted this long because of the perfect combination of their innate abilities and the memories Sunny had entrusted to his shadows. Saint was using the broken oath, which continuously weakened and damaged the corrupted. She also wielded the Sin of Solace, which was a transcendent weapon that possessed an insidious power. That power came at the cost of dealing mental damage to its wielder, which Saint was immune to. A combination of soul damage and mind damage was truly a formidable one, especially when paired with her sublime mastery of the sword. Additionally, the Sin of Solace possessed the omen of dread, enchantment, which caused fear to poison the minds of its enemies. That enchantment augmented the potency of the Mantle of Fear and Dreadlord that Nightmare possessed, making the Black Steed more powerful the more he was feared. In the past, that seamless synergy had never failed, but today it was not enough. Well, that was before Sunny himself was added into the equation. Dashing toward the ravine, he sent his senses forward. The voiceless abominations were strong enough to bully his shadows. But how long would they last now that the master of the shadows had arrived? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.